A very warm evening to one and all present here. I welcome all the esteemed dignitaries present with us today. National Institute of Industrial Engineering, or NITI, is a prestigious public management institute in Mumbai and is considered as one of the top institutes in its category. It offers postgraduate diplomas in various fields of management and industrial engineering. The vision of the institute is to be the thought leader in industrial engineering, education, and research, and partner in the manufacturing renaissance of the nation. We today are honored by the presence of our esteemed panelists, Shri S. Gurumurthy Sir, Professor Manoj Tiwari Sir, Professor K. S. Ranjani Ma'am. Shri S. Gurumurthy Sir is a leading corporate advisor, chartered accountant, and editor of Tughlaq, a political satire magazine of great repute. A multifaceted genius, he was often described as brilliant chartered accountant and exceedingly astute amateur lawyer. A lesser known and more impactful work of Sri Gurumurthy Sir is the study of industrial clusters across India by crisscrossing the length and breadth of the nation. We are also honored today by the presence of Professor Manoj Tiwari Sir, Director NITI Mumbai. He has published over 320 papers in international journals of repute. He is mentioned as the top leading author in the domain of supply chain analytical techniques by Journal of Computer and Industrial Engineering. He is also the recipient of Most Influential Research Award in the domain of supply chain management and operation. We also have with us Professor K.S. Ranjani. She is a professor in the area of accounting and finance at NITI. She has done her PhD in management studies and is also a chartered accountant. She is also guest columnist for various business magazines and websites. We are also honored by the presence of our esteemed deans, faculty members, and all other dignitaries present among us on this occasion. With this, I would like to forward the mic to Ranjani ma'am for further.
Thank you, Soumya. A very warm welcome to all. It's our pleasure, honor, and privilege to have in our midst somebody so eminent as Sri Gurumurthy ji. I have been fortunate to listen to a lot of his lectures. I have been fortunate to be a student of his when he taught the course on Indian economic models in IIT Bombay. He has this magical capacity to hold people in complete sway when he speaks. So I'm really not going to take a lot of time, but just to set a context to today's talk on the future of Indian economy. Gurumurthy ji has been one of those few people who have consistently and passionately believed that a model or a framework that is used to evaluate Anglo-Saxon economies is unjustly imposed on a nation like India, who has her own potential. So he has always argued for an India-centric model, a model that will factor in the aspirations of the man standing in the last mile. It is with similar, I think it is the similar thought process that probably emboldened me enough to go and request him to write a preface for my book, and which also incidentally talks about the last woman standing in the mile and in the line, and he was kind enough to write it. And I think more importantly, it is a passion that he shares, that economy does not belong to the few elite. It belongs to the common Indian. So it is this very, very strong conviction, I think, that that adds a lot of uniqueness to his thoughts and makes a lot of his ideas for Indian economy something that can work in the Indian context. So it's really an honor. It's a rare privilege for us. We are all ears. So we have a very large group of attendees. It's rising by the minute. So I'm not going to stand in the way of the really penultimate or the ultimate talk that we are all waiting for. I request our director, Professor Manoj Tiwari, to introduce Sri Gurumurthy formally so that we can then all listen to his talk. Thank you very much.
I used to place my utmost regards to a man whom I know since passing my bachelor degree, and I used to read his columns in the Indian Express at that time. And so fearless and so straight was his write-up at that time that we learned many things of the economic fundamentals and created interest after going through his articles on energy and on the corporate and on many other aspects of that. So everybody knows that he's basically by profession a chartered accountant, and presently he edits a very powerful magazine called Tughlaq. And hailing from a very humble background, actually he hold a lot of you can say influence and you can say create an aura of people's things in the minds of policy planners and policy influencers. Long back we have seen this particular thing, and currently also. And he's really having a very, you can say, critical thinking abilities, and that made him an unconventional thinker on many ways. And you can see that mixing of the chartered accountancy along with the journalism has attracted many industry doyens towards his ability, and one among them very famous industrialist Sri Ramnath Goenka. So at that time, the paper which he was running is presently also, but I think divided into different ways. One is called New Indian Express and Indian Express. So at that time, it was the Indian Express, and it was run by the Ramnath Goenkaji, and there we used to listen a lot of columns and other things of Sri Gurumurthy ji. And also you can say his voice on the Swadeshi Jagaran Manch, which has demanded many of the, you can say, inquiries about the power domains like Indran and you can say power projects in Dabhol at that time. And you can say a lot of task force he proposed to check the black money in the market. And I just mentioned a few minutes before that the kind of incisive what you can say analysis he did about the demonetization and before the demonetization scenario, I think it has opened my mind at that time that what are the very strong logic that why government has gone for the demonetization. And he's a firm believer in the ability of countries, 50 million old small and micro enterprises, which has tendency to create jobs. And I'm sure that the moment we will explain Professor Mr. Gurumurthy about the inclusive manufacturing, which includes both manufacturing, logistics, MSME, IT sector, financial supports. I think that kind of model may be in his mind actually to see that how Indian economy can reach on the top by following that sort of things in the coming days. So as a visiting faculty of IIT Bombay, he used to take very popular classes on Indian economic model. And he's the chairman board of trustees of the Vivekananda International Foundation. And everybody knows the distinguished professor of legal anthropology in Shastra University. So with this note, I request Sri Gurumurthy ji to have a start and enlighten us by your analysis, sir. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tiwari. I am delighted that I'm speaking to a very informed and inquisitive audience. It is easy to get a speaker, but it is difficult to collect an audience which will encourage the speaker to share difficult ideas. So in that respect, I'm very happy that Ranjani invited me to share my thoughts today with the NITI related friends and faculty group. So the topic that she wanted me to talk on is the future of the Indian economy. See, the word future is a very confusing term. If you look at the stock futures, it is in days. If you look at human future, it is in years. But if you look at the nation's future, it is in decades. So when we talk about the future of Indian economy, we should at least have a decade. So what is happening today is the very contrary of that. Now, stock market based assessment of India. Look at what the stock markets have done. Since April 2020, now, in about 15 months, the stock markets have risen from 27,000 points to almost 53,000 points. It has almost doubled in this period of crisis. When Corona has hit the world, it has hit India. It has brought down the Indian economic growth to minus. In this period, the stock market has doubled. So, how difficult it is to measure the economy through the stock market is or wrong to measure an economy through stock market is exemplified by this growth of almost 80 to 90% in this period, when it should be almost down by 50%. So you can understand that the norms by which a nation is judged by the financial economists is completely wrong. It is proved here, it is proved elsewhere. But still, our mind is hooked to this thought. Another, the future in the context of economics is mixed up because of financial economics, corporate economics, and also the principles of national economics, which measures the nation's future by annual GDP, quarterly GDP, Q1, Q3, Q3, Q4. This decides the psychology of the nation and the policy makers, which I think is very wrong. That in the same way, the corporates measure their performance used to measure their performance by annual balance sheets. Now it has ceased to be because of the listing in stock markets. It is quarterly. And in quarterly also, what will be the next quarter will be the estimate that decides the quarterly growth perspectives about the company and the stock market. So the whole thing has become so short term, so short lived. So we have to move away from this short term understanding of how the Indian economy is likely to move. And we have to go back to at least a decadal perspective. And Indian economy being what it is not something which you can disconnect from the global economy and see it as purely a domestic economy, nor can you look at India as a totally integrated economy with the global economy. And so there will be a symbiotic influence between the domestic economy of India and the international economic forces that operate. So in this, we have to have a historical perspective of how India was performing for the last 70 years and how the global forces move. This is very, very important. My first proposition is the future of the Indian economy will be symbiotically influenced and symbiotically connected with the global developments, both economic and geopolitical. This is my first major proposition, which I will relate to what happened in the past. I would put three perspectives. India lost out the Cold War period by the policy of non-alignment. It never measured up to the geopolitical perspectives of the world. With the result, India was neither here nor there. And it had lost out 2 decades because of the idea of non-alignment, which was more an ideal. than a real understanding of geopolitics. In the post, I'm not looking at the colonial period issues. Colonial period, India lost out heavily. But in the post-colonial period, when India was supposed to reconstruct its economy, where it erred and how it affected its relative growth rate, its relative performance, its relative assurance to the world that it is a performing economy, that is what I would work on. So, in the post-Cold War period, India lost out because of the wrong alignment caused by the non-alignment. So India lost about 30 long years, 3 decades. And in this, what happened? Because of India's own obsession with non-violence and peace, in a world of violence and power, India did not pursue the nuclear option. It is the nuclear option which India demonstrated in 1998, which made the world take India seriously geopolitically. Unless you are taken geopolitically seriously, you are not going to be taken as a serious player, even in economics. Otherwise, you will be only recipient of Aid India programs, which was going on till about early 1980s and even mid 1980s. India will be seen as an aid receiver, not as a performer. It is because of our geopolitical failure and our unwillingness to play global power politics. The world respects power. The world respects countries which are willing to play power politics. We entered this only in 1998. And you can understand how many years have been lost in this entire thing. Because, in fact, when we exploded the atom bomb, President Bill Clinton said, a country of Buddha and Gandhi has done such a horrendous thing. We were always a land of Buddha and Gandhi, but nobody respected us because we were a land of Buddha and Gandhi. Only when we exploded the atom bomb, America began negotiating with us. Then we became a member of the nuclear club. Then they began to take us seriously. This is not a country, a pushover country. So we suffered from the Arjuna versus Ashoka conflict. You know, 2 great wars in India were the Kalinga War and the Kurukshetra War. In the Kurukshetra War, Arjuna was in the state of mind of Ashoka after the Kalinga War. He was unwilling to wage the war. He was persuaded to wage the war because wars are necessary evil. But Ashoka, after waging the war, fell into a confusion that he wrongly waged the war and gave up the war. And that became the model for India, not to wage the war because wars are evil, became the psyche of India for almost 2 millennia. And you know where it landed us in terms of inviting invasions, and we became almost a nation without freedom of any kind for a millennia. So India began playing the global power politics. In geopolitics, this is a very, very important, and geoeconomics, this is a very important position for a nation to take. And I will support with how China developed. China developed precisely because it was willing to pay the power politics, and it was willing to match the wits of powerful nations and be part of the strategies and counter them, support them, become relevant. Precisely, India refused to take that risk. And that is why India never counted for a very long time. Almost 50 years was lost in this. So what happened? When we were asked to become the member of the UN Security Council, the first Prime Minister said, we don't want it. Now we are begging to be part of in National Security Council, United Nations Security Council. You can understand how our mindset was that we should always be doing panchayat. We should always be doing peace missions in a world of conflict. So India lost out in this. Now, what are the perspectives for India today? I will make a comparison of where India is. India is 1/6 of humanity and 1/2 of the democratic world. This is very important. In fact, it is even 60% of the democracy. And India is having youth population, 50% and more of Indian population is youthful. And in this, we have, China's birth rate today is 1.3. Replacement rate is 2.1. That is why one-child norm in China became two-child norm, and it has become three-child norm. Because there is the connection between demography and economics, and demography is considered to be only a burden. Now, demography is considered to be important in economics. This is the shift in the last 20 years. And India has the demographic advantage over China, over all nations. And we have 3 decades of progress over China. Now, 1/6 of humanity cannot live like other small nations, live on other nations. It has to live on its own. But it can't live without others also. So India has to balance the domestic economy and its international participation. There is a third element. Other nations cannot also live without India because of its geopolitical impact. Only 13% of the global population is under liberal democracies. Liberal democracies may be powerful in finance. It may be powerful in GDP numbers. It may even be powerful in technology and also in terms of defense. But when it comes to numbers, when they are so small, they have to align with India. And that is what I am going to prove what is happening today as an important aspect of how the future of the Indian economy will be shaped by global developments. Now, just to compare India and China from 1950 to 1970s. This is relevant and necessary in the current context, and how China stole a march over us and we failed, and how the global situation is turning to ensure that India will have a lead over China, and this is important for the future of the Indian economy. China had a Marxist state and a socialist economy. India had a democratic state and a socialist economy. This was the position till about 1980s. China changed into a mix of Marxist state and market economy, and India changed into a mix of democratic state and a market economy. This was the position in 1990s between both. But the geopolitical conditions favored an autocratic China and not a democratic India. This is important. Because of this favor of these G7 nations, which are powerful economies, powerful democracies, they favored an autocratic China. Why? The post-Cold War period opened opportunities for all. But China grabbed the opportunity because of geopolitics. It is not because India did not have the opportunity. India did not play in tune with geopolitics. See what happened. The Cold War advantage of China's ties with America. It gained the nuclear status. It gained UN Security Council membership. It played a critical role in breaking the Cold War. Many may not know. Kissinger traveled on a secret visit to China in 1971 by a plane provided by Pakistan government. And Pakistan government interlocuted between China and America, and that gave Pakistan a 25-year lead in its friendship, in its advantage globally and with America over us, just because of this one significant role that they played in global politics. And Pakistan and China axis and secret Kissinger visit put India so much behind and put China and Pakistan so much forward And this reflected the economic performance of China, Pakistan, and India inversely. So now with US with the autocratic China and against democratic India, in fact, the Kissinger papers say Kissinger himself was amused when he was talking to the Dobrynin, the Russian ambassador to America, that he was taking a position against democratic India and in favor of an autocratic China. He was himself amused by his position. This is in the secret papers of Kissinger. So you can understand how, by not risking to play the global power game, India lost out geopolitically as well as in economic terms. The Cold War debt, America and the West repaid to China between 1990s and 2015 by engaging with China, by having extraordinary trade relationship with China, by allowing the entry of Marxist China in market economics of WTO. In fact, in 2016-15, the US Trade Representative and European Union Trade Representative filed petitions in the WTO saying China is not a market economy, should not be in WTO. China said the very fact we are in WTO means we are a market economy. WTO had to declare in 2019 that China is not a market economy. It was too late. A Marxist state has devastated the market economy of the world, is what the West has understood today. Because of its geopolitical short-term interest, the West promoted an autocracy, and it is the Bhasmasur, it is the Frankenstein which they have raised, and they feel the entire norms on which the global geopolitics and geoeconomics has progressed is wrong, and they are now reconsidering how to reposition themselves, and that is clear in the developments in June, in the G7 meetings, NATO meetings, and European Union and US conclaves, which I will immediately come. It took 2 decades for the West to realize that a Marxist China cannot fit into a market economy. And the Marxist China will destroy the global market, and it has destroyed the global market because of its secret operations, secret funding, because of its capacity to think and act as one entity. In 2002, China entered the WTO, grew exponentially and overtook Japan in the year 2012. In 2015, as I told you, the US Trade Representative claimed China is not a market economy. In 2019, WTO declared it was not a market economy. By this time, the West realized its folly. And in 2020 and 2021, the COVID explosion from China completely changed the complexion of the world. And Kissinger, who formulated the Cold War balance of power theory, Cold War, post-Cold War order, he himself said the world order will change forever. This is a very, very important statement. He didn't give the cause. He didn't say how it will change. He said it will change forever. Now, it is changing. China's image has taken a beating in the world because much of this is not discussed in India. I have to state the Pew study of October 2020 says, as compared to 2002, in 2020, the negative image about China has risen from 40 to 81 in Australia, 16 to 74 in UK, percentages, 31 to 71 in Germany, 34 to 73 in Netherlands, 45 to 85 in Sweden, 35 to 73 in US, 35 to 75 in South Korea, 21 to 63 in Spain, 42 to 70 in France, 27 to 73 in Canada, 61 to 63 in Italy, 42 to 86 in Japan. And 7 out of 10 people felt no confidence in Chinese chief Jinping to do the right thing regarding the world affairs. In 2013, President Obama said that we will be having two great power relationship. That is how China's stature rose in the world. Geopolitically, China had an enormous amount of influence in American geopolitical, geoeconomic think tank. And China became the principal factor in the Western scheme of things. And that advantage which China had was because of its autocratic structure, with which it completely grabbed the control of the global market, and its exports went up, its imports were minimal, it secured such huge trade surpluses, it has built up a foreign exchange reserve of almost $3 trillion. And it became the biggest investor in America. And this became the problem of America. It resulted in Trumpism, as most commentators have said. Trump was not an accident in America. Trump was the result of American history. And Trumpism is now lasting because everybody thought with Trump, American opposition or the Western opposition to China will evaporate, because the European Union entered into the comprehensive investment agreement with China in December 2020, thinking that Trump will come back and they will have to align with China for their own interest, because they were lacking in funds for development. They wanted funds for the development of aircraft, for 5G. They wanted China to invest. China had acquired 10% of the interest in all the ports in Europe. It had acquired interest in most of the infrastructure, 10%. And so they felt China has so much money, China will fund. This was the position in 2020, December. And after Biden won, I think the transatlantic alliance became alive. This is the most important point for the Indian economists, Indian geopolitical thinkers, Indian intellectuals to think about what happened from February to June in 2021. That is going to be the most important platform to think how the what is the future of the Indian economy. That I will try and explain. You know, what happened when the COVID issue came? China completely overawed the world and said it is a natural evolution. And at that time, some people were trying to say it is a Wuhan virus which came into the Wuhan virological laboratory. And because of the opposition to Trump by the US liberal newspapers and generally the liberal group, they said it is a conspiracy of the right wing. It is a racial theory. Now the whole one circle has come. In January, the WHO had said they could neither say which is, they could neither say whether it is a lab leak or natural evolution. It is very, very likely it is a natural evolution. It is very, very unlikely it is a lab leak. This triggered the world into how even the WTO has been manipulated to give a verdict with which China can move ahead. And in that, enormous amount of work was done by some of the best journalists who brought out that there is no way the bats which were 2,500 kilometers away in Yan'an could have produced a virus in the wet market in Wuhan. There is no way, 2,500 kilometers, the bats cannot fly, and they can never fly under the weather conditions. And it is now almost clear that there is a lab leak. So the US has made a complete U-turn with the first major announcement by Biden that they will have, the American intelligence agencies will have to investigate the origin of COVID virus, including to investigate whether it is a lab leak. It's a completely total reversal of the new American regime's position that it was a natural leak. So things began turning from February, and it has become unstoppable now with 3 summits, which are so important for India, and how it is going to make a change to the future of the Indian economy and the global economy, and what are the prospects and risks for India. And this is what we have to, this cannot be judged by annual GDP. It cannot be judged by quarterly GDP. It cannot be judged by the BSC indexes. It has to go deeper into the forces which will shape the world for the next 1 decade. And where are we in that whole process? The NATO, the G7, NATO, and US EU summits, which took place between June 11th and June 15th, has completely changed the landscape of geopolitics in the world. China was the most admired country in America. It was the most admired country in Europe. They all wanted to befriend China. It was seen as a performer. And China began playing global superpower politics. And everybody was trying to be friends with China. As I said, President Obama said that we will talk as superpowers. You know, they were treated as equals. As early as 2005, the US Commerce Secretary said that we would like China to be interlocutors between America, North Korea, Iran, and Sudan, and ensure that they are also part of the global order. You know, this was the important position that China was getting. US was trying to besiege China for its own geopolitical strategy. So this is something which, even in the Cold War period, the entire Soviet Union, with all its powers, did not command this kind of leverage over the West. See what has happened on June 11th to June 15th. First point, China is a security and systemic threat to democratic nations, Europe, America, NATO, and European Union. This was the first declaration. Never in the last 30 years, there was a statement against China. In fact, in 2019 NATO meet, China was just mentioned in one sentence. And in fact, a country like Emmanuel Macron said China is no issue. China is no threat to us. 2019. In 2020, the NATO statement made only one reference to China and not as a threat. Today, NATO feels and expressly says China is a security threat to the West and to the world. The second, China is told to respect human rights in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and have peace in Taiwan Strait. It was always, China was always violating it. 30 years it has violated. 20 years it has violated intensely. 10 years it has violated more intensely. The West was keeping quiet. It is only now they say, no, you have to respect human rights. Human rights was always there. Third, cooperate in the expert-led probe into the origin of COVID. Why? COVID origin was in 2019 December. And everybody was keeping mum. Now, inquire into its origin. Because the lab leak theory has gained traction all over the world. And another aspect, it is concerned about, it's important from the economic perspective. Everything is related to economics, but more important is the concern that these three meets have expressed about the forced labor global supply chain, including in the agricultural, solar, and government sector. You see, this means it could go up to sanctions. It could go up to ban in the WTO. So these are all important factors for us to consider how the world will take shape in the next 20 years. So the idea of the geopolitical declaration is important in the context of India being invited as a guest nation, that the Prime Minister was asked to address the G7 nations, because they want to expand the G7 into D10, democratic 10. India was never regarded as a full democracy by the West. They always said we are a liberal democracy, you are a half liberal democracy, or you are illiberal democracy. But they now find without India, there cannot be democracy in the world. The Foreign Policy magazine brought out a paper in the year 2019, January, saying that all liberal democracies are under stress. In fact, the liberal democracies of Eastern Europe and Central Europe countries may vanish and they may go into autocracies. Because in liberal democracies, youths are not voting, only 45% of the youths are voting, because they have got so much freedom. They are not even interested in the country and the system which gives them the freedom. They are enjoying their life. But on the contrary, the Indian economics, Indian democracy is becoming deeper. This is what it says. And it finally says, Indian democracy is the silver lining or golden lining of democracy. So the democratic nations need India today, and that is why the G7 nations are wanting India. So the 70-year difficulty investment that India has made into democracy is now going to pay dividend. In the context of the fact autocracy is working against the global order, global economics, globalization, global supply chain, this is a very important development, because 1/6 of humanity cannot develop on its own. And it cannot develop only by relying on others. It has to be a mutually symbiotic and mutually helpful approach, a time for which has come to India. And in this, one thing is certain, 30-year engagement of China, admiration of China, glorification of China by the West is over. And now they have not used the word containing China, but without using the word C, the C word, they have virtually said they have to contain China. They have said only in certain areas like climate and nuclear regime, we need China's cooperation. In other areas, they are going to have competition and containment of China. China, seen as a performer for the last 20 years, is now seen as a villain. I said how China's acceptability has gone down deeply, and distrust in China is growing, because these democracies have to respect the people, and so there is an alignment taking place between the views of the people about China and the regimes which are ruling the democratic nations. Now, the global supply chain idea, globalization, global market, global village, all will undergo phenomenal changes, because this current supply chain and the current globalization, global market, global village is inclusive of all autocracies, which has produced the greatest autocracy as a challenge to the West. Now it is going to be democracy centric. The world will be more and more democracy centric, and because of that, the global supply chain principle, which is based on cheap sources, will change into cheap and safe sources. This is where India will figure. We will be cheap as well as safe, but China will only be cheap. Autocratic nations can only be cheap and cheap. This has been understood by the democratic world, and this is going to be a very, very important development in the context of the future of the Indian economy. On the global trade and global market, which was centered around globalism that included autocratic nations on par with the democratic nations, and even autocratic nations were glorified for their performance, will center around globalism of democracies. So there will be an effort by the democracies to contain the autocratic countries, the chief of which is China, which has acquired enormous amount of economic, technological, and military power to challenge the West. This is the total ecosystem that is evolving in the world. And also the liberal democracies, which were saying India is no liberal democracy and all that, they are coming around to the view India is a more stable democracy, is a more deepening democracy, because in the West, minorities do not vote, underprivileged do not vote, uneducated do not vote. Do not vote means they vote far less. But in India, it is the reverse. Minorities vote 75% of the minorities, 65% of the OBCs vote. It is the forward caste, it is the educated people who vote less. This is the study in 2009, which was brought out as a stunning model how Indian democracy is bottom spread. So it is regarded as a more deepened democracy. And with the result, the G7 nations have decided to bring India into a common platform of D10, Democratic 10, which is going to put us on par with these nations. And they will have to take us seriously because we have invested 70 difficult years in democracy. As China will increasingly face isolation, India will increasingly get acceptance. Internally, India's social capital will be India's strength. India will not be like the Anglo-Saxon world based on individualism, individual enterprise. We are a collective nation. We are a family-oriented, community-oriented, relation-based society. India will develop a market economy. It will not become a market society. Most Indian commentators do not discuss the important distinction between a market economy and market society. A market economy works with the society. A market society replaces the society. The family ceases to be an institution. The unbridled individual rights and human rights, which are supposed to be measured against the state, is measured against families. It is measured against communities. So the idea of human rights sans family, sans community, sans society, that has resulted in market society. It is not the Asian model. This, The Economist magazine came out in 2009. How the Asian nations rebounded because they are only market economy and they are not a market society. So this important distinction is necessary for us to understand how Indian economy will be shaped, how Indian economy will be strong, how Indian economy will secure itself because of its social capital. And so the seeming conflict between human rights and the society, human rights and the family, human rights and the community will have to be re-narrated. And that has to happen in India. Indian intellectualism will have to take the challenge that human rights will have to be measured only against state action, and it should not be measured against the social capital of any country. And so India will emerge as a market economy and not as a market society. So the idea of West-centric one-size-fits-all model, which is based on this eccentric individualism, is given up by the West in the year 2005 when the G20 nations said that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all model, which the World Bank confirmed in 2008, and the United Nations, which said there has to be one-size-fits-all model in 1951. It gave up that model in 2013 and said each nation will have to develop its own model. So when we talk about globalization, it will not be one global model. It is diverse global model working together. And so the narrative of globalization, the definition of globalization, the depth and the reach of globalization will not be what it was made out in 1990s. It will undergo a change. And every country will have a measure of self-reliance. And America is now speaking about America first. And it is speaking about jobs. It is not only Trump. The National Security Advisor of America, appointed by Biden made the first statement, job security is national security. So every country is becoming conscious of its jobs. It is becoming conscious of imports. It is becoming conscious of exports. So there is nothing like a free trade. It will be a trade which is consistent with the national interest. And so the idea of nationalism, which the West calls patriotism, is going to play a very, very important role. And poverty alleviation through trade will replace poverty alleviation through development. Development is more important than trade. Development through trade will be undermined, and to that extent, the WTO will have to be restructured because it cannot be WTO in the sense in which it operated after 2019 declaration that China is not a market economy. Any country can impose anti-dumping duties against China because it is not a market economy and its costs are not very favorable. So you can understand the threat which the WTO is facing to its existence. And WTO-led model will not be the future model. An alternative model will have to develop. India will need, the world will need an alternative philosophy and worldview and style, which no other country can provide except India, provided the Indian intellectuals realize that they have a great role to play. The idea of unbridled rights, which yields space to duties. Actually, duties are destroyed. There was an exchange between H.G. Wells, who wanted Mahatma Gandhi to sign the Human Rights Declaration. Mahatma Gandhi wrote that I will sign your declaration, provided you change your title from Declaration of Human Rights to Declaration of Human Duties. How far-sighted it is. We unnecessarily promoted the concept of human rights to destroy the way of life of people. So individual rights and collective rights will have to be aligned. And that is where the stability of the family, the stability of the community, the stability of a nation, the stability of a world will rest. World cannot be atomized into individual. So this idea is necessary, and India will have a very, very important role to play in shaping a future philosophy and way of life of the world. And I don't know whether the Indian academic institutions, intellectuals, Indian media will undertake this job seriously. There may have to be some support from elsewhere because they are also seeking an alternative way of life as to how to shape the future of the world. And India has a living model, but Indians do not have a live thinking about it. And for which I have been pleading, as I have done in my life. I traveled throughout the length and breadth of India to understand the economic, commercial, and social capital of India. And that is what made me think differently. But this is not the mainline thinking of India. This is an empirical analysis which has not come into the full-blooded research thinking of India. And I think as India grows, as India begins to be more and more visible, more and more Westerners will come and study India as to why India is having this stability, despite the fact that there is so much of diversity. Put India on the one hand and the rest of the world on the other. You have more diversity here than the rest of the world put together, and still a democracy functions. How? When they study this, they will understand that there is a trade-off between duties and rights in India, and that is going to be the model for not only politics but also economics, for sociology, for the very way of life of the world, which the world has missed out in the last several centuries. And this is going to be the risky time also, because this will transform India as one of the principal adversaries of China, which has global ambition. It cannot attain its global ambition. That means it becomes a regional leader and India accepts a secondary position, which it cannot. So there will always be a clash between India and China, and in which India will have to balance, not declare China as the enemy, and at the same time work with others who want to contain China. This is very important, and China will keep disturbing India's thinking on development by Ladakh type of incidents. Always keep the Indian mind occupied with China. This is their strategy, and we will have to tackle this in terms of domestic policies, domestic preparations, the defense preparations, and in terms of alliances like the Quad, about which China is quite worried. In fact, Biden made a declaration which no leader will make, that Xi Jinping asked him, don't don't join the Quad. That means China is worried about Quad. In Quad, it has regional powers coming together. It's a regional challenge. It will be the challenge to its global power. So I understand that India is playing a very deft game of not declaring China as the enemy, which it should not, and at the same time not accepting China's superiority. This is going to be a geopolitical as well as economic challenge. We will continue to have trade relationship with China, but not the runaway trade relationship which made India pay hugely, several billions, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars by way of trade deficit to China. It will not work. So India will have to leverage on its social capital, and it has to fight the ultra-liberal idea. India will have to realize its strength and weakness. It has to leverage on its strength, and it has to eliminate its weaknesses. I see a very challenging decade ahead of India. And I think institutions like NITI must promote an unbiased approach, intellectual approach. Because everything is biased. It is about not the facts. It is about who speaks it. It is irrelevant who speaks, so long as the facts are grounded on truth. Facts and truth will have to go together. Sometimes facts are manufactured, truth can never be manufactured. So I'm happy that I have shared a wide range of ideas. It is not limited to economics, but it has entirely put together as an impact on economics. I'm happy that all of you listened to me with patience for so long. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you for this. It didn't feel long at all. We feel it just finished too soon. But of course, the good thing is that we have a question and answer session ahead.
So I hope I finished in time.
Absolutely, sir, on dot, on dot. So, so a very, very complex nation, a very, very complex topic. He went probably centuries behind, and then so neatly, so beautifully woven together. All the pieces of the puzzle just put in those right places and given to us in just the, you know, the right way. I mean, whatever we can absorb. So, sir, I think therein lies the brilliance of people who make very, very complex things. You know, they are able to present it so simply. So I think the way you captured the depth, the stability, the participative nature, and the inclusiveness of Indian democracy, I'm not sure many of the Indians themselves appreciate the magnitude of what we pull off in our elections, the magnitude of the inclusiveness, the way we care for the person standing in the line. I think it's something that when people like you say, we realize it, or it comes to us better. Before we proceed with the question and answer session, I want to welcome Professor Vaidyanathan has joined us. So I want to extend a very warm welcome to him. Professor Bapat has joined us. I want to extend a very warm welcome. Our own alumni, Mr. DSN Murthy. So Mr. Murthy created the app for the entire FinTech app for Ram Janmabhoomi. So he's also an alum of NITI. So he has also joined us. I extend a very warm welcome to all of the invitees. Our deans have joined us, Professor Shirish Sangle. Professor Khanapuri was here. Yes, he's also joined us, and Professor Vivek Kanzode. So all our deans and associate deans, they've joined us. So now, sir, with your... So I think, Professor, I think Mr. Murthy has come on screen. So he is an alumni of NITI. So I'll just, with your permission, now move on to the questions. So we have a lot of questions. I think a couple of questions on the screen also. I'll first take the questions that the participants had already registered and sent to us. One area that you already spoke about, sir, I think in a little bit of, by way of a passing remark, you spoke about the Indian markets. So there are a lot of questions on the Indian market. I'll combine all of them in one. People are asking what is happening that, you know, our markets are doing so well in spite of the COVID and everything. And what is it about the Indian market which will help an average investor to anticipate any kind of, you know, a value bubble that has been created? I mean, whether it's overheated, probably that's what they want to know. And mostly it's a puzzle, you know, as to how the economy or the Sensex is doing so well in spite of all these setbacks that we have seen.
See, there is a disconnect between the performance of the economy and financial market for almost 2 decades now. What part of it is bubble and what part of it is expectation about the future development is very difficult to judge. But one thing is definite. There is no speculation taking place in the Indian market. It is expectation. And this expectation is because India is likely to become a very important center of future economic activity is definitely there. It is one of the important perspectives which has gathered in the last few years. And this is assisted by the fact that a huge liquidity flow in the world is seeking investment opportunities. And because that investment opportunity is relatively better in India, I am putting it in a very careful manner, it is relatively better in India that liquidity is seeking India. But if day after tomorrow, if the same liquidity finds a slightly better opportunity in Argentina, it will move there. So the Indian stock market will come down. But to what extent it will come down, to what extent the expectation about India's growth in future will sustain its values, and to what extent the other part, because the liquidity, global liquidity is unable to find a better opportunity, India is gaining. That part may go to other areas. So there is a combined effect of high global liquidity seeking investment opportunities and India's own rise as an important economic player in which many people would like to invest in future. In what proportion funds have come into India between these two critical factors is the issue in why the stock market has gone up and to what extent it can be sustained or cannot be sustained.
Ranjani.
Sorry. Yes, I am now on mute. So there is a curiosity among many of the participants. They want to know which of the sectors will probably recover fastest, or if there is going to be no recovery on its own, then what should the government do to jumpstart and you know, kind of put on track what kind of sectors should be given priority?
You see, it is not that the government will decide which sector will revive first. The economic activity is now at a low because social activity is at a low. You must understand this economic activity is not divorced from social activity, family activity, community activity. We used to have weddings in which 50,000 people used to participate. And we used to have birthday parties. We used to have useless travels. I used to make travels 30, 40 times. Now I find, is the travel necessary? So there is a whole lot of changes which are taking place. An alternative way of life is working out. And so I think in certain areas, the recovery is going to be a long drawn one. All high travel based. For example, bus travels and train travels will recover very fast. But it may not be the same with air travel. Middle, low level hotel businesses will pick up fast, but not high level hotels. So this kind of stratified recoveries will take place. But I think housing and all, there will be a jump. This is my view. So infrastructure sector will recover very fast because when there is an arrested development, then when activities pick up, there is a huge jump in the whole thing. And we will have to manage it also properly. For example, the cement demand has gone up so much in Tamil Nadu. The cement prices have jumped by 40%. So this kind of distortions will also come. So when the social activity picks up, naturally the economic activities will pick up, and economic activities will pick up disproportionate, as it happened in the automobile sector. When the restrictions were lifted last year, the automobile sector grew exponentially. They made huge profits because the arrested demand suddenly flows like a broken dam. So I believe that once the corona infection is controlled through vaccination, we have a huge vaccination program. I think when the vaccination picks up, 30, 40, 50% of the people are vaccinated, then there will be more confident social activity picking up. And I believe if the government succeeds in vaccinating the people completely, I mean, even if they do it 60, 70% by the end of the year, I think there will be a huge jump in economic activities towards the end of the year, and it will progressively increase. But I believe that the travel, and it is that most of the international projections also, that the travel industry will pick up only by 2024-25. It may pick up faster in India because the scale of activity has been less. International scale of activity is much larger. So I believe that Indian economy will grow exponentially next year. Next year means 2021. To end of 2020 onwards, it should grow exponentially, is my understanding.
Okay. There is a very interesting question. From 1970 to 2005, the share of agriculture in South Korea's GDP fell from 25.5% to 2.9%, an average annual decline of 6%. And they heavily moved towards industrialization, which resulted in a boom in their economy. So they are asking whether a South Korean model can be replicated in India.
I don't think any country can be a model for any other country. The agricultural population in America is about 2.5%. The agricultural population in France, which is the largest agricultural country in Europe, is 11%. The agriculture-related population in India is more than 50%. So the share of agriculture coming down is because of increase in other activities. It is not that actually agricultural production this year has been unprecedented. It has topped all the estimates have gone wrong. That is the kind with this corona and labor issues and agriculturism, this farmers' agitation. All this has proved to be wrong in the context of the agriculture production we have. So I feel that the share of agriculture in financial terms is very different from the share of agriculture in social and basic terms. There cannot be a comparison of America with India, or France with India, or South Korea with India. The fact is that the agriculture is not the only activity in villages. Many people think of villages only as agriculture. No, that is the sum total of so many activities. All the karigars, they are all there in villages. They go to towns, work and come back. So we agriculture related activities, agriculture assisted activity, agricultural community activities also go to shore up the rural economy. We are now limiting it only to agriculture and fisheries, which is wrong. And a more comprehensive data preparation is needed.
There is a question about the Atmanirbharta that we are currently wanting to pursue. So the policy aims to reduce domestic market access to imports, but at the same time open the economy and export to the rest of the world. So will this push us to a pre-liberalization stance, or is this going to give us different results? So this is a question.
Atmanirbharta has been the policy of almost all countries, whether they spoke about it or not. China has been pursuing Atmanirbharta policy. As a state, it could do it, it could enforce it, it could. For example, if you have only one child, you will have only one child. This kind of thing they could do, and so they succeeded in that. America pursued an open market, but Trump came and said nothing doing. He began building walls, he began raising taxes, he began fighting with even Europe. And he posted one of the most attractive economic performances in terms of GDP, in terms of market growth, in terms of taxation. So the American model is actually the Atmanirbharta model today. So now for a narrative of open economy, we have to align Atmanirbharta with free trade. There cannot be free trade which means the destruction of Atmanirbharta, which was the position in 1990s. That is over, right? There will be a new narrative of global trade which will understand the need for Atmanirbharta, because global trade cannot take care of individual nations' requirements. It has been proved today. And so long as the world doesn't have one order, so there is an autocratic order, there is a democratic order, there is a civilizational order, there is a liberal order. So you cannot make the world one order to ensure that trade works equally for all. Now trade doesn't work equally for all. It works in favor of autocrats. So the very definition of free trade will undergo a change. It has to undergo a change. It is already undergoing a change. Nobody can say America is not a free economy, but America is one of the most conscious economy about Atmanirbharta. Europe together is talking about Atmanirbharta. It doesn't talk about one country. The entire Europe is talking about it. So India's Atmanirbharta is not a matter of choice. It is part of the global ecosystem today. So there is no contradiction between opening the economy and protecting the economy, because somewhere you have to protect and somewhere you have to open. In fact, I have always been advocating that there has to be freedom of investment, not freedom of trade. If we had not protected the automobile industry, do you mean to say India would have become an automobile exporter? If South Korea had not protected the automobile industry, do you mean to say it would have become an automobile giant? You have to protect the economy. Why will people come and invest if they can buy the same car at a lesser price in India, which is manufactured in Korea? Why will they manufacture in India? Unless you make the foreign car costlier. So development through investment is better than development through trade. This was destroyed by the West through the concept of globalization and the rule-based trading. The rule-based trading cannot destroy and should not destroy Atmanirbhar. So there has to be an alignment between the two.
There is a lot of concern, actually, several questions on the lost livelihoods. What could be some innovative ways to, bring back to reduce the unemployment problem and, to restore livelihoods to people?
See, actually, as I said, when the economic activity picks up, there will be an exponential growth in job opportunities. In fact, as I am seeing, because I also relate with all these realtors and house developers. They say, sir, the moment the activity is going to be allowed, there will be huge demand. There will be actually so much demand for labor at various levels. I'm not saying it will be uniform, but it is not that the livelihoods will be lost, but certain areas it's a problem. For example, I am very happy personally that there will be huge small traders developing and the malls will be hit. I mean, I am personally not unhappy about it. And if large hotels do not revive for a very long time, let it not revive. But small activities will pick up because people cannot be without supplies. So once, as I said, the social activity picks up, social movements pick up, social demand picks up, then everybody will be. In this, the most important thing is going to be how are you going to finance it? That's where I think there is no innovation in the Indian mind. That you have got to be a bank-driven economy. You cannot be a stock market-driven economy, and the banks must have greater leverage in lending money, and you cannot have this NPA policies which say that come on, if you don't pay within 90 days, you are finished forever. And so I think this will have to change. I don't know who has the guts to change it. It requires a huge policy campaign, policy advocacy, which is not taking place. And I think it will come per force. You cannot stop it. Funding of the revival is going to be the problem because everybody is falling short of capital. At least for small industries, you have this Mudra system, which is working fairly well for micro businesses. But for small businesses, particularly, which are above micro, less than medium, the financing problem is going to be important.
Okay. So that's I think a very radical thought that the NPA norms should be changed. Like you say, I don't know whether somebody will even bell that cat. And to move away from a balance sheet lending to more of income generation lending, and rather help the businesses instead of kind of boxing them up with very rigid norms. So I think it's an idea ahead of its time, or perhaps one day it's going to see the light of the day. We don't know. So we have multiple questions from our participants in the chat box. I'll pick up a few questions because I think we may not have time for all. So here is a question. We wanted to know your opinion regarding how India will be able to balance between the conflicting objectives of BRICS and the Quad and Quad Plus. So how will they balance the two? This is a question.
Actually,
and whether it can actually check the power of China.
BRICS is purely an economic forum, trade and economic forum. Quad is purely a security issue. These two are different. So there is really no contradiction in the field, but there is contradiction in the participants. In BRICS, Russia will emerge as the moderator. And Russia will ensure that there is no collapse. For example, Brazil has openly declared China as having released a bioweapon in the corona, in Wuhan. It is part of BRICS. You cannot lay a greater charge against China. It is part of BRICS. And Russia will ensure that Brazil is protected. Because more the BRIC nations fight, Russia will acquire diplomatic power. So far as Quad is concerned, it depends upon how much aggressiveness is there. See, China is regressive within. See, China was trying to forge a collective leadership after Deng Xiaoping. Now, it has gone regressive by putting all the powers in the hands of one man. So China's progression within has stopped. Its aggression outside has increased. So Quad will depend upon how much China is going to be active in the Indo-Pacific region and how much it is going to be aggressive against Taiwan. So these are two different issues. I see no contradiction between how BRICS will function and how Quad will.
Okay. I think we will not have time for all the questions, but I think I will ask a very representative question from the MBA fraternity. Here is a question: how is the placement scene going to be overall affected, and how will the MBA students fare? You know, many of them who will graduate in 2022, they are worried about that, about the COVID-19 impact on these graduates.
See, I am not an advocate of MBA students going for placement at all first. It has opened up so many possibilities for one MBA student started a coffee, Kumbakonam degree coffee chains, doing phenomenally well. Another MBA student began doing idli business. I mean, your education, your competence is to zero in on something you can do yourself. I think that spirit is lacking in our management education. Is if 20-30% of the MBA students pursue own business, 70% will get placement. If all the 100% is going to seek placement, 30% will not have placement. My simple answer.
So you're asking for Atmanirbharta?
No, I will.
In the MBA fraternity.
Otherwise, I tell you, all over the country, I have only seen this. There are uneducated employers employing educated employees. All over the country. They are employing MBAs, they are employing chartered accountants, but their educational qualification is 8th standard, 10th standard. What is your education which does not promote entrepreneurship? If somebody becomes an MBA, he only thinks of a 20 lakh figure. And if you want to start business, you have to be your own peon. You don't want to be, because in your mind, your status has increased. So you don't want to be doing any business. Obviously, you are only prepared as an employee. All the people who start businesses are virtually uneducated. Then what for we have education?
I think that's food for thought for all these students who are now, listening, who have tuned in and who are listening. So I think we have time for one last question.
I must tell you, when I was teaching in IIT, I was always saying that you should not go for campus interview. I was so happy to see a boy in Indore, brothers. They came and actually it was a very emotional thing for me. They came and touched my feet and said, "Sir, you gave us the idea that we should start a business. Sir, in 5 years, we have grown into company employing 1,500 people. Otherwise, we would have gone for a job." So we have the potential, but we don't have the thought.
Okay, so I think it's very unjust to all the people here who put out multiple questions, but I just want to capture some repeated, there's an often repeated theme here from the participants about the neoliberalism or the wokeism. So, how do you think that is going to impact the kind of neoliberalism where, you know, where we are kind of shaming ourselves or our past? That seems to be a very increasing trend. So many people here also have shared their anxiety. So maybe you can leave your thoughts on that.
See, basically these waves come and go. Ultimately, a civilization is able to overcome all this. If you have a civilizational sense, if you don't have a civilizational sense, you are failed. The problem in the West is they are losing their civilization. In India, we will be able to fight this neoliberalism, ultra-liberalism, and treat it as an exception. We will not do anything about it to say except that these people are a little abnormal and leave them. But in the West, they will take guns and fight each other. So we have digested so many things. We have digested a Charwaka, we have digested a Jabali. In Tamil Nadu, we have digested a N.V. Ramaswamy Nayak. So in Tamil Nadu, to go to a temple was an act of shame in 1960s. Today, you don't find a temple where you don't see thousands of people together. So the same Tamil Nadu, 50 years it changed. Because the civilizational values are deep rooted in it. So the small protests will come and go. I'm not really worried about it, but I really pity them. That they are becoming such atomized people. They are becoming so isolated people. And of course, the media provides all. See, the media provides only news as exceptions. Only if dog, human beings bite the dog, it becomes the news. If dogs bite human beings, it is no news. If in 5 places human beings bite dogs and it comes as news, we tend to feel that dogs have stopped biting human beings have started biting dogs. So we need not worry about it because India is a very, very deeply rooted civilizational nation. And its civilization is not a uniform civilization. It's so diverse. In every place there is something. From in religiously, from Kul Devata to Grama Devata, how people from California come for their Mundan in Rajasthan. If the civilizational sense has nothing to do with this liberalism. Neoliberals are exceptions. This liberal wave will come and go. We need not worry about it, is my answer.
Okay, so we seem to have completely run out of time, but we have so many more questions out there. It's so unfair that we have you for such a short time. That's pretty much, you know, seen from the enthusiasm of participation.
If you want, you please ask us, send the questions in email. So that
yeah, that's very kind of you. I'll do that. But also I'll take the liberty of asking for more sessions with you, Niti. And we are completely overwhelmed. Very, very grateful. I now request our director to formally thank Sri Gurumurthy ji.
And it's you can say unparalleled discussions and the topic of very immense, you can say, importance. which I think Sri Gurmurti ji has highlighted. And I was also very much enlightened to see the difference between the market economy and market society, and all the differences very finely he has described. And the kind of well-established mark he talked about our Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India, and also the importance that India should play actually. And we have to strengthen our logistics, supply chain, manufacturing base, particularly his emphasis on the so small to medium sector industries. I think these are the some of the very, very vital, you can say, outcome of today's discussions, and hope that we as an intellectual will try to foster it out and try to fan it out among the people who matters a lot for this. And by this way, I can say that sir, it's so nice of you for coming to our platform, and we are overwhelmed. And many more sessions, as Ranjani has pointed out, we may keep on requesting you, sir, and please, in the light of, you can say, days to come, many other developments, we need your valuable opinion and advice for the NITI and for NITI students community, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for coming to our platforms.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sir. I would like to express my gratitude towards all those who made this event possible and worked to ensure its success. I would like to thank Sri Gurumurthy Sir for being with us here today, our Director Sir, Professor Manoj Tiwari, Professor Ranjini Ma'am for handling this event so well. I would also like to thank Dean Student Affairs, Professor Hema Date, Associate Dean Placement and Branding, Professor Rauf Iqbal, Associate Dean Planning and Coordination, Professor Vivek Kanzode, Dean Academic Professor Padmanav Acharya, Dean SRIC Professor Vivek Khanapuri, Dean Alumni Affairs Professor Shirish Sangle, Professor Purnima Sangle, Professor Poonam Singh, the Media Relations Committee, all the administrative and support staff for your constant assistance and guidance. And last but not the least, I would like to thank all the special dignitaries and students for their overwhelming response and for being an amazing audience. Thank you.
I just want to thank our Mr. Ashwin from planning and coordination. He's done a lot of back-end work, so I want to thank him also. Are you going to take a picture, Prathamesh?
Yes, ma'am.
So we'll just request sir to, yeah.
On the count of three. 1, 2, and
Yeah,
3.
are others also switching on their videos? Murthy ji is there? Our deans. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Khanapuri is there. Professor Shirish. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I have taken a lot of snips.
For DSN Murthy sahab.
Done? Prathamesh done?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Sir, thank you so much. For me, it's really a dream come true. I wanted you on the NITI platform since so long. Thank you so much for this. I can't express it enough. Thanks.
Thank you.
Close the event. He has to close the event. Ashwin.